Once World War II came to a close, the Soviet Union and the United States lost their only common enemy, setting the Cold War into motion. One outlet for this tension was the space race, an informal competition between the two powers to get a satellite and then a man into space. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, winning the first victory. Then, in April 1961, the Soviet Union succeeded in sending the first man, Yuri Gagarin, into space. From these defeats, the United States vowed to land a man on the moon before the end of the decade, setting the foundations for NASA's lunar landing program, better known as Project Apollo, and successive projects.
Hello, my name is Frank Sutliff.
The Space Transportation System, STS, was a manned launch vehicle program that lasted 30 years. The shuttle itself was reusable and was composed of an orbiter, 2 solid rocket boosters, and an external tank. Although the program was successful in building the largest man-made structure in space, the International Space Station, it suffered many failures, such as the Challenger disaster.
The accident of the Challenger, which was the STS-51, exploded after 73 seconds of flight. It had launched and 7 astronauts lost their lives immediately upon the explosion. There was no suffering, it was very quick. I was working on, this is the payload doors, and inside the payload doors was the teacher's satellite. Attached to the teacher's satellite was a booster rocket, maybe the size of this little cone right there, and it was attached to the teacher's satellite. Its job was, when this shuttle released itself from this tank and these side rockets, and it was approximately 125, 115 miles, I forgot the exact number of miles, in orbit. These payload doors would open and the shuttle would deploy the teacher satellite with the IUS, which was what I was working with, and I was the program manager for the Air Force with it, and move away. And then it would ignite the IUS and push the teacher satellite 22,500 miles, 22,400 miles further. Then it would be in an orbit that it would be synchronous with the Earth. And this little rocket did a lot. It was pretty big at the time because it's all inside here. This took it up 100 miles. This took it up 22,500 it was.
The IUS, or Inertial Upper Space, was a booster rocket that would carry satellites into higher orbits from the space shuttle. The TDRS-B satellite, which stood for Tracking and Data Relay Satellite System and was commonly known as TDRS, was a space communications satellite meant to assist in NASA manned flights and increase the amount of data that could be transferred. The original satellite had experienced problems with the IUS and had not entered the correct orbit, so this was a second attempt at the goal.
I was working for the Air Force. I was a consultant. I was his technical advisor, and I had no management over contractors. I was like a Air Force officer without a uniform, but I spoke through the officer that I worked with, a major, and he gave me the, if I had a suggestion, I suggested to him that the contractor do this. I did not say, contractor do this. If he didn't do it, And I thought strongly enough, I would then tell its boss about it, who had his counterpart, and they would talk it over. And if they couldn't agree, we'd go up another step. And we could go all the way to the Secretary of the Air Force. So if the Air Force was supporting their personnel, and which they joined shoulders and do, it would go elevate all the way up. This could happen, and it did happen a few times. But the last person for the Air Force is a civilian, the Secretary of the Air Force. So he was honest enough to make an honest decision. So my position, being the civilian side, was I was like an officer, but I was not an officer. I was a consultant, technical consultant. We were all tired, but we expected no problems. It was we were all getting pretty used to the launch of shuttles. It was the 51st launch. It was beginning to be pretty much a normal thing. I was in a facility called the VAB, the Facility Assembly Building, where these were put together, these solid rockets, and moved out to the pad to be attached. So we had a room in that building that was protected by 1-inch thick lead all the way around. The doors, they had all sealed, the holes were sealed, everything. There could be no leakage of information, because there were Soviet satellites up beaming down trying to find some leaked information. There were ships out at the just out of the range in open water with their radars beamed towards us and their antennas beamed towards us. They were trying to find out, so that I was in that room. We used it to check out, to make sure this IUS was functional, that was inside the space shuttle. When my screen went blank and everything went quiet in the room, and the printers kept printing, and everyone was looking with their jaws dropped at each other and looking around trying to say, what has happened? Because after all, we were in that sealed, just like a sardine can. We were away from any explosion or any problem, which we stayed for about, I think, 14 hours after that, because the atmosphere outside was or could be dangerous, not healthy, and our vehicles that were parked outside in the parking lot, they turned white because of the acid in the air from the explosion affected the vehicle's coating of wax, and so when it was safe, the fire department came and hosed off all the vehicles because it could be washed off with a high pressure water.
The Rogers Commission, officially known as the Presidential Commission on the Space Shuttle Challenger, was created to investigate the disaster and determine its cause by observing the collected and reassembled remains of the ship. It included notable figures like Neil Armstrong, Sally Ride, and Richard Feynman.
It was caused by a failed O-ring in the booster solid rocket. There's one on each side of the shuttle, The failure was in an O-ring around the segment of the rocket. There were various segments as was put together and sealed with this O-ring. It was very cold that day. It was close to freezing, if not 32. It could have been less there on the pad. That failure allowed the hot gases to escape and cause a detachment of the solid rocket from this external tank, which was full of hydrogen and oxygen, which was the fuel for the space shuttle. They ignited upon contact with each other. It did not require any match or any fire. Just touching each other, they would ignite. When this broke off, it ruptured this tank, and the two fuels instantly went together, and boom, there was a huge explosion, which was fatal for all of the astronauts and broke it up into many, many pieces. The rockets continued to burn, and the movies that we've seen and pictures of it, you can see them curling around and still fire coming out. It was put together and examined and placed in a I'm trying to say the word correctly, a Minuteman at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. The remains of the astronauts and the people on board that could be identified as being belonging to a certain person was given to the family for burial. Those parts that could not be identified is buried in a monument there. No, I believe the technology at that point was as good as we could possibly do. It was just a case of learning something. It's like asking the question, computers today. I work with computers with cards and paper tape with holes in them. Could we have done better if we would have had the solid memory that we have today and all of the information? Of course we could. Well, it was just that. We did the best we could with the knowledge we had at the time. But it was a growing technical and technology involved.
One of the results of the Challenger disaster was a 32-month hiatus during which time the Rogers Commission investigated the accident. It was here that the consequences of go fever were addressed. The desire to keep launching vehicles despite clear warning signs, such as a fatal flaw in the design of the SRBs that was known to scientists before the launch, had, at least in part, contributed to the disaster.
Well, I think it was excellent. The thing that I used to really kind of get my goat was to see in the paper about the shuttle launch, but it was 22 minutes late. You know, we're looking at this experimental vehicle with thousands and thousands of things that must go right and the leading edge of technology. But we were getting so used to it that we got to complain about something. And the press did that. And so people started going as passengers, and that wasn't right. That didn't happen, like I said, for years afterwards. not only the technical about improving the makeup of the O-ring. They still use O-rings, but definitely. And I think the temperature that they launch in will definitely was raised. And also the thought of it being like a bus and carrying civilians, being safe, being the 51st was, we're getting used to it. It's a good thing. It had accidents before, but not from the on this scale where there'd be that many people that were killed. But I guess the main thing was that having civilians and the teachers and the congressmen and people arrived just as passengers, that stopped. And you had to have the volunteer trained people who realized the dangers, who would take that danger involved.
The most notable crew member was the teacher, Krista McAuliffe, who performed the role of payload specialist. She was recruited as part of a NASA program to have a civilian, a teacher specifically, in space to boost public interest in the space program. And the attempt worked. 17% of Americans watched the takeoff live, and 85% knew of the disaster within an hour of its occurrence.
I'm very much against that for now. Someday in Flash Gordon time, yes, but until it's a non-experimental thing, let's keep it scientific. I don't think I've had any feelings of that I did something because I was at awe of the beauty of it. I think it's a beautiful scene to see the blue earth and even the clouds going up, even from the launch of the vehicles as the earth got smaller as we went up. I just thought it was just very exciting and very entertaining, and it was a good feeling. I think it's very exciting that private industry is getting into the program now, and NASA is still involved, but it's becoming more competitive with the private industry wanting to put vehicles up, manned and unmanned.
Frank went on to contribute to various other NASA projects before retiring in 1993. He now lives with his wife Kim and their cat Spike.